Black Janitor saw the symptoms everyone ignored, and ended up saving the life of the millionaire CEO. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the gleaming marble lobby of Meridian Technologies, one of Silicon Valley's most successful tech companies. It was past midnight, and the building stood nearly empty except for the occasional security guard making rounds and the soft whir of vacuum cleaners echoing through the corridors. Marcus Washington pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the executive hallway, his weathered hands gripping the handle as he moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had cleaned these floors for 15 years. At 62, Marcus had seen executives come and go, watched startups rise and fall, but he had remained constant, invisible, a shadow moving through the night shift when the powerful people who ran this empire were home in their mansions. Tonight, however, something was different. The corner office, the one belonging to CEO Daniel Sterling, still glowed with warm light spilling under the door. Marcus paused, checking his watch. Mr. Sterling never stayed this late, not in all the years Marcus had worked here. Marcus knocked gently on the door, his knuckles barely making a sound against the heavy mahogany. When no answer came, he pushed it open slightly, peering inside. Daniel Sterling sat hunched over his desk, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled, his $1,000 suit jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. Papers were scattered everywhere, some fallen to the floor, and an untouched dinner sat cold on a side table. The man who commanded boardrooms and moved millions with a single signature looked small, fragile even. Marcus had seen this before, not in this office, but in another life, another time. His late wife Sarah had sat just like that in the months before her diagnosis, the exhaustion that went bone deep, the confusion that clouded sharp minds. Without thinking, Marcus stepped inside. "Mr. Sterling, sir. You all right?" Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes taking a moment to focus on the janitor. For a second, irritation flashed across his face, the automatic response of a man unaccustomed to interruption. Then his expression softened, perhaps recognizing the genuine concern in Marcus's voice. "Marcus, isn't it?" Daniel asked, surprising the older man. In 15 years, they had exchanged perhaps a dozen words. "Yes sir, Marcus Washington. You don't usually work this late, and you look." Marcus trailed off, not sure how to tell a billionaire CEO that he looked terrible. Daniel laughed, but it was hollow, tired. "I look like hell, you can say it. Board meeting tomorrow. Have to review these quarterly reports, but the numbers keep swimming around. Can't seem to focus." He rubbed his temples, wincing. "Haven't been sleeping well. Stress of the job, you know." Marcus moved closer, his trained eye catching details others might miss. The slight tremor in Daniel's left hand as he reached for his coffee cup. The way he squinted at the papers even though his glasses were on. The beads of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. These weren't signs of stress. Marcus had watched his Sarah exhibit these exact symptoms for weeks before they finally went to the doctor, before they heard the word that changed everything, tumor. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said carefully, setting down his cleaning supplies. "How long have you been having these headaches?" Daniel looked up, surprised by the question. "A few weeks, maybe a month." "Why?" Marcus's heart sank. A month. Sarah had waited 2 months before telling him about her headaches. By then, it was almost too late. "Sir, I don't mean to overstep. But have you seen a doctor about this?" Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "It's just stress, Marcus. I've been through worse. This merger we're working on, it's a $20 billion deal. Of course I'm stressed." But Marcus wasn't backing down. Something in his gut, that same instinct that had saved lives during his time as a combat medic in Vietnam before life brought him to these office buildings, told him this was serious. "With respect, Mr. Sterling, stress doesn't make your hands shake like that. Stress doesn't make you sweat when it's 68 degrees in here." Daniel's hand instinctively went to his forehead, feeling the moisture there. His expression changed, a flicker of fear crossing his features before he pushed it away. "You're not a doctor, Marcus." The words came out harsher than intended, and Marcus saw the immediate regret in the younger man's eyes. "No sir, I'm not," Marcus said quietly. "But I watched my wife die from a brain tumor because we ignored symptoms just like yours. She was a strong woman, Mr. Sterling. Worked through pain that would have broken most people. Kept saying it was just stress, just tired, just getting older. By the time we found out what was really wrong, the tumor was the size of a golf ball." The office fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Daniel stared at Marcus, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. This wasn't just the janitor, the invisible man who cleaned up after everyone else. This was a man who had lived, who had loved and lost, who was standing here at midnight trying to save a stranger's life. "Your wife," Daniel said softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Marcus nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "Sarah Washington. Best woman I ever knew. We had 38 years together before the cancer took her. The doctors said if we had caught it even 2 weeks earlier, she might have had a chance. 2 weeks, Mr. Sterling. That's all." Daniel's hand was definitely shaking now, and not from the symptoms. "You really think something's wrong with me?" Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down, something he had never done in this office before. "Sir, I've been watching you for the past month. You've been walking differently, favoring your left side. You've been wearing your glasses more often, squinting at screens you used to read easily. Last week, I saw you grab the wall outside the elevator, just for a second, like you were dizzy. Your assistant, Miss Chen, she mentioned you've been forgetting meetings, mixing up names. That's not like you." Daniel's face had gone pale. Each observation hit home, each symptom he had dismissed suddenly taking on new meaning. "I thought I was just getting old. I'm 58, these things happen." "Maybe," Marcus conceded. "But maybe not. Mr. Sterling, what's the worst that could happen if you go get checked out tomorrow? You waste a few hours and find out you're perfectly healthy. But what's the worst that could happen if you don't go and I'm right?" The question hung in the air between them. Daniel looked down at the papers scattered across his desk, the merger documents that had seemed so important just minutes ago. "The board meeting is tomorrow. This deal." Marcus stood up, his voice firm but kind. "Sir, with all due respect, there won't be any deals if you're dead. And if something is wrong, every day counts. Every single day." Daniel's phone buzzed on the desk. A reminder about the board meeting, no doubt. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked back at Marcus. "You really think this is serious?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I pray to God I'm wrong, Mr. Sterling. But my gut has saved lives before, and right now it's screaming at me that you need help." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Daniel picked up his phone, but instead of checking the reminder, he opened his contacts. "My brother is a neurosurgeon at Stanford Medical. He's been trying to get me to come in for a physical for months." His fingers hovered over the call button. "It's past midnight," he said, almost to himself. "He'll answer," Marcus said with certainty. "If he loves you, he'll answer." Daniel made the call. Marcus could hear the surprised voice on the other end, then concern as Daniel explained why he was calling so late. Yes, he had been having headaches. Yes, there was some confusion, some balance issues. As Daniel listed the symptoms, Marcus saw his face change, saw the reality setting in. When he hung up, his hands were definitely shaking now. "He wants me to come in first thing in the morning. Said not to wait." Marcus nodded. "You need someone to drive you?" Daniel almost smiled. "I have a driver, Marcus. Several, actually." Then his expression grew serious. "But thank you. For everything. For noticing what everyone else missed. For caring enough to say something." Marcus began gathering his cleaning supplies. We all matter, Mr. Sterling. Every single one of us. Sometimes the janitor sees things the board of directors misses because we're looking from a different angle. As he reached the door, Daniel called out. Marcus? Why did you really notice? Out of all the people who see me every day, my assistants, my executives, my own family, why did you see what they didn't? Marcus turned back, his weathered face thoughtful. Because I've been invisible my whole life, Mr. Sterling. When you're invisible, you learn to really see people. You watch, you notice, you remember. And because once upon a time, I failed to notice the signs in someone I loved. I swore I'd never make that mistake again. He left then, pushing his cart back into the hallway, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and his fear and his phone call to make to his driver. Marcus had done what he could. The rest was up to Daniel. The next morning, instead of attending the board meeting that would decide the fate of a $20 billion merger, Daniel Sterling walked into Stanford Medical Center. His brother, Dr. James Sterling, had assembled a team overnight. The tests began immediately: MRI, CT scan, blood work, neurological exams. Daniel's assistant called frantically. The board was assembled, where was he? But Daniel had turned off his phone. For the first time in 20 years, he was unreachable to everyone except the medical staff surrounding him. By noon, they had the answer. A tumor, yes, but not malignant. Benign, but growing, pressing against crucial areas of his brain. Operable, but only because they had caught it in time. Another month, Dr. Sterling told his brother, and it would have been too large, too integrated with vital tissue. Another month and the success rate of surgery would have dropped from 90% to 30%. Daniel thought of Marcus, the quiet janitor who had noticed what everyone else had missed, who had pushed past propriety and hierarchy to save a life. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Daniel postponed the merger, shocking the business world. The great Daniel Sterling, stepping back from a deal. Unheard of. But he didn't care about the whispers, the stock fluctuations, the angry board members. He had work to do before the surgery, but not the kind that involved spreadsheets and contracts. He found Marcus the next evening, in the same hallway, pushing the same cart. Marcus, he called out, and the older man turned, concern immediately flooding his features. Mr. Sterling? Should you be here? Did you go to the doctor? Daniel held up his hand, showing the hospital bracelet still on his wrist. Benign tumor. Surgery next week. They say you saved my life. Marcus's knees seemed to buckle slightly with relief. He leaned against his cart. Thank God. Thank God. Daniel pulled out an envelope from his jacket. This is for you. Marcus looked at it but didn't take it. I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling. I didn't do it for money. I know, Daniel said. But this isn't charity. This is recognition. 15 years you've worked here, and I never once really saw you. Never knew you were a veteran, never knew about Sarah, never knew you had the kind of observational skills that could diagnose a brain tumor better than any of my Harvard-educated executives. This is back pay for all the value you've brought that went unrecognized. Marcus slowly took the envelope, not opening it. What are you going to do? About the surgery, I mean. Daniel sat down on a bench in the hallway, designer suit and all. I'm going to have the surgery. Then I'm going to recover. Then I'm going to come back and run this company differently. I'm going to see people, Marcus. Really see them. The way you saw me. Marcus sat down beside him, two men from different worlds, brought together by a moment of human connection. That's good, Mr. Sterling. That's real good. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Daniel spoke again. I've been thinking about what you said. About being invisible. About seeing things from a different angle. I want to create a position here, chief observer or something like that. Someone whose job it is to notice things others miss, not just about health, but about operations, about morale, about the human element of this company. I want you to consider it. Marcus laughed, a deep, genuine sound. Mr. Sterling, I'm a janitor. I clean floors. Daniel turned to look at him directly. No, Marcus. You save lives. You see truth. You understand people in a way that all my MBAs and consultants never could. The salary would be significant. You could retire your mop, maybe travel, see the world you've been cleaning up after all these years. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Sarah always wanted to see Paris, he said finally. We never made it. Never had the money, then never had the time, then never had the chance. Daniel stood up, straightening his jacket. Think about it, Marcus. The offer stands, regardless of what happens with my surgery. He started to walk away, then turned back. And Marcus? That envelope? It's enough for Paris. Several times over. Sarah would want you to go. The surgery took place on a Thursday. Marcus had asked for the day off, his first sick day in 5 years. He sat in the waiting room of Stanford Medical, out of place among the families in his best church clothes, clutching a worn Bible that had been Sarah's. 8 hours. The surgery took 8 hours. When Dr. James Sterling finally emerged, exhausted but smiling, Marcus was the first person he spoke to, having been told by Daniel to look for the distinguished black gentleman with the prayer book. He's going to be fine, the doctor said. Complete removal, no complications. He'll need recovery time, therapy, but he's going to be fine. Marcus wept then, right there in the waiting room. Not just for Daniel, but for Sarah, for all the what-ifs and might-have-beens. A nurse asked if he was family. Yes, Dr. Sterling answered for him. He's family. Daniel's recovery was remarkable. The headaches vanished, the tremor disappeared, his vision cleared. But more than that, something fundamental had changed in him. When he returned to work 6 weeks later, he implemented changes that shocked the corporate world. Mandatory health screenings for all employees. Comprehensive insurance that covered everything, even experimental treatments. A new department called Human Insights, headed by Marcus Washington, whose first initiative was to interview every single employee. From intern to executive, to understand their perspectives. Marcus never did retire his mop entirely. Some evenings, he could still be found pushing his cart through the hallways, but now it was by choice, a meditation of sorts. His official office was on the executive floor, with a view of the San Francisco Bay. His first report to the board identified 17 operational inefficiencies that had been invisible from the top, saving the company millions. His second report prevented a major lawsuit by catching employee dissatisfaction before it erupted. His third report, well, that one saved another life, identifying an accountant showing signs of severe depression who got help just in time. The financial press couldn't understand it. Daniel Sterling, the ruthless CEO, had gone soft, they said. Stock prices would surely suffer. Instead, Meridian Technologies saw its most profitable year ever. Employee retention skyrocketed. Innovation flourished. Turns out, when people feel seen, really seen, they give their best. 1 year after the surgery, Daniel called Marcus into his office. On the desk was a framed photo from Marcus's recent trip to Paris, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower with a smile that reached his eyes. I owe you everything, Daniel said simply. Marcus shook his head. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Sterling. I did what anyone should do. I paid attention. I cared. I spoke up. Daniel smiled. That's exactly why you're extraordinary, Marcus. Because you think that's ordinary. Marcus looked out the window at the city below, all those buildings full of people, each with their own struggles, their own symptoms, their own stories. You know what Sarah used to say? She used to say that God puts us where we need to be, when we need to be there. 15 years I cleaned these floors, Mr. Sterling. 15 years leading to that one night when I walked into your office. If that's not purpose, I don't know what is. Daniel stood and walked to the window, standing beside Marcus. The board wants to know why I've named you as my emergency successor in my medical directive. They don't understand why I would trust a former janitor with decisions about my life. Marcus chuckled. What did you tell them? Daniel's reflection in the window was smiling. I told them that you've already saved my life once by seeing what they all missed. That you understand the value of every moment, every person, every life in a way that no business school could ever teach. That when I was just another task on everyone's calendar, you saw me as a human being who needed help. The sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Marcus thought of Sarah, how she would have loved this view, how proud she would have been to see him here. But more than that, he knew she would have been proud that he had spoken up, that he had pushed past his place, his role, his invisibility to save a life. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said after a long moment. Daniel, the CEO corrected. We've been through too much for formalities. Marcus smiled. Daniel, then. I've been thinking about expanding the Human Insights program. There are janitors, security guards, cafeteria workers in every building in this city who see things, know things, notice things that could save lives, save companies, save futures. What if we created a training program? Teach them to trust their instincts, to speak up, to know that their perspectives matter. Daniel turned to face him fully. You want to make the invisible visible. Marcus nodded. Every building has a Marcus Washington pushing a cart through its hallways. Every company has someone who sees the truth from the ground up. We just need to teach them that their voice matters, and teach the people at the top to listen. Within 6 months, the Meridian Insights initiative had spread to 12 major corporations. Janitors, security guards, and maintenance workers were given training in observation, communication, and when to escalate concerns. They weren't turned into doctors or consultants, but their unique perspectives were valued, their observations heard. 3 more potential health crises were caught early. 2 workplace accidents were prevented. 1 case of embezzlement was discovered by a cafeteria worker who noticed unusual patterns in lunch meetings. The program won awards, was featured in business journals, and became a Harvard Business School case study. But for Marcus, the greatest reward came in the letters. Letters from other invisible workers who had found their voice, who had saved lives or careers or companies simply by being seen, by being heard, by mattering. 5 years later, at Daniel's 60th birthday party, held not in some exclusive club but in the Meridian Technologies cafeteria, transformed for the evening into a celebration space, Marcus gave a speech. The audience wasn't just executives and board members, but every level of employee, from the newest intern to the night security guard who had to be convinced to come inside. 5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice strong and clear, I knocked on an office door at midnight. I saw symptoms everyone else ignored, not because I was smarter or more educated, but because I was paying attention from a different angle. That night changed both our lives, but more importantly, it proved something crucial. Every single person in this room has the power to save a life, to change a future, to matter in ways you might never expect. He looked at Daniel, who was sitting with his brother James, both men healthy, grateful, present. We tell ourselves stories about who matters and who doesn't, whose observations count and whose don't. But disease doesn't care about your salary. Truth doesn't care about your title. And wisdom, real wisdom, it can come from anyone, anywhere, at any time. All we have to do is listen. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. To those of you who clean these offices tonight, who guard these doors, who serve the food and fix the lights and maintain the systems that keep this place running, you are not invisible. You see things others miss. You know things others don't. And your perspective, your voice, your presence matters. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Later that night, as the party wound down, Marcus found himself back in the executive hallway, not with his cleaning cart this time, but walking beside Daniel as equals, as friends. They stopped outside Daniel's office, the same door Marcus had knocked on 5 years ago. "You know," Daniel said, "I never did close that merger. The $20 billion deal that seemed so important that night. The company went with someone else." Marcus looked concerned. "I'm sorry. That must have been difficult." Daniel shook his head. "Best thing that ever happened. We ended up developing our own technology instead of buying theirs. It's worth twice that now. But more importantly, it taught me that sometimes what looks like the most important thing in the world is just noise. The real important things, they're quieter, easier to miss if you're not paying attention." They stood there in comfortable silence, two men who had saved each other in different ways. Daniel from disease, Marcus from invisibility. Both from the assumption that worth was measured in dollars and titles rather than in observation, compassion, and the courage to speak up. "Marcus," Daniel said finally, "I've been thinking about retirement. Another 5 years, maybe less. When I go, I want you to know that I've recommended you for the board. Not as a token, not as a symbol, but because you understand this company, these people, in a way that transcends spreadsheets and market analyses. You see the human element that drives everything else." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You know they'll never accept a former janitor on the board." Daniel smiled. "They accepted a CEO who chose surgery over a merger. They accepted a human insights department run by someone without an MBA. They've learned that the view from the ground up is just as valuable as the view from the top down. Maybe more so." As they parted ways that night, Marcus thought about the journey from that midnight encounter to this moment. He thought about Sarah, how she would have laughed to see him here, not because it was funny, but because it was beautiful, this proof that life could surprise you, that purpose could find you in the most unexpected places. He thought about all the nights he had pushed his cart through empty hallways, feeling invisible, not knowing he was exactly where he needed to be. The next morning, a young janitor named Rosa knocked hesitantly on Marcus's door. She had noticed something about one of the programmers, she said. The way he had been coding differently, making unusual errors, seeming confused. She didn't want to overstep, but... Marcus listened carefully, then walked with her to the programmer's desk. Within an hour, the young man was on his way to the hospital, where they would discover a minor stroke that, caught early, would leave no permanent damage. "How did you know to come to me?" Marcus asked Rosa as they watched the ambulance leave. She smiled shyly. "Everyone knows the story, Mr. Washington. How the janitor saved the CEO's life. How you see things others miss. You taught us that we matter, that what we notice matters." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. This was Sarah's legacy too, he realized. Every life saved. Because someone paid attention, someone cared enough to speak up, was a testament to the lesson her death had taught him: never ignore the symptoms, never dismiss the signs, never assume someone else will notice what you've seen. "You did good, Rosa," he said. "You did real good." She beamed and returned to her work, pushing her cart with a different kind of pride now. She wasn't just cleaning offices. She was watching over people, part of an invisible network of observers who had learned that sometimes the most important vision comes from the most unexpected angles. That evening, as Marcus prepared to leave, he found Daniel waiting by his car in the parking garage. "I heard about Rosa and the programmer," Daniel said. "Another life saved." Marcus nodded. "She reminds me of myself 5 years ago. Seeing everything, saying nothing, thinking her observations didn't matter." Daniel pulled out a small box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Inside was a pin, simple but elegant, with an I symbol and the words, "I see you," engraved below. "For the Human Insights team," Daniel explained. "For everyone who has learned to see and speak. But the first one is yours." Marcus pinned it to his jacket, feeling the weight of it, the responsibility and the honor. "You know what the real miracle is?" he said to Daniel. "It's not that I saw your symptoms. It's that you listened." A CEO taking medical advice from a janitor? That's the real story. Daniel laughed. "Maybe that's what I'll call my autobiography, The CEO Who Listened to the Janitor." "Think it'll sell?" Marcus grinned. "Add, and lived because of it, and you've got a bestseller." They laughed together in the parking garage, their voices echoing off the concrete walls. Two men from different worlds who had found common ground in the most human of experiences, the recognition that every life has value, every perspective has worth, and sometimes the person who saves you is the one you never thought to see. As Marcus drove home that night, he passed by the cemetery where Sarah was buried. He would visit tomorrow, tell her about Rosa, about the programmer, about all the lives being saved because people were learning to see, to speak, to matter. He would tell her that her death had not been in vain, that the lesson learned in losing her was now saving others. The story of the black janitor who saw the symptoms everyone ignored had become legend in Silicon Valley, but for Marcus, it was simpler than that. It was about paying attention. It was about caring enough to risk overstepping. It was about understanding that the view from the bottom could see things the view from the top never could. Most of all, it was about the truth that Daniel had written in his latest shareholder letter, words that had shocked Wall Street but inspired thousands of workers across the country. The most valuable asset in any company isn't the patents or the products or the stock price. It's the security guard who notices someone in distress, the cafeteria worker who sees patterns others miss, the janitor who cares enough to knock on a door at midnight. Every person in every role has the potential to be the hero of someone else's story. We just have to see them, hear them, and believe them. The letter ended with a dedication, to Marcus Washington, who saved my life by refusing to be invisible, and to all the invisible workers who are the true eyes and ears of our organizations. May you never doubt your worth, your perspective, or your power to change lives. The initiative that started with one conversation in a midnight office had become a movement. Companies across the nation were implementing their own versions of the Human Insights program. Medical schools were inviting Marcus to speak about the importance of observational skills. Business schools were teaching cases about the value of ground-level perspectives. But for Marcus, the greatest success was simpler: fewer people were dying from ignored symptoms, fewer workers felt invisible, and fewer executives believed that wisdom only came from corner offices. On the 5th anniversary of Daniel's surgery, Meridian Technologies held its first annual Seen and Heard Day, where every employee, regardless of position, was invited to share an observation, a concern, or an idea directly with leadership. The response was overwhelming. Innovations came from unexpected sources, problems were identified before they became crises, and the company culture transformed into something remarkable, a place where every person truly mattered. Daniel's tumor never returned. His annual scans were clear, his health excellent. But he never forgot the night when a janitor's knock saved his life, never forgot the lesson that the most important observations often come from the most overlooked observers. He had gained more than his health back, he had gained a new way of seeing the world, one where every person's perspective had potential value. As for Marcus, he continued to walk the halls of Meridian Technologies, though now as Chief of Human Insights rather than janitor. His office door was always open, and hardly a day passed without someone stopping by to share an observation, a concern, or sometimes just to talk to someone who would really listen. His salary had increased 100-fold, but he still lived modestly, using most of his wealth to fund scholarships for children of service workers and to support the expanding Human Insights initiative. He had finally made it to Paris, not once but many times, often taking other workers who had never traveled, showing them that their horizons could expand beyond the buildings they cleaned. One rainy Tuesday, a new janitor named Thomas approached Marcus nervously. He had noticed something about one of the executives, something that reminded him of his father before his heart attack. Marcus listened carefully, then together they approached the executive. Within hours, the man was in cardiac care, a major blockage discovered and treated before it could cause a heart attack. Another life saved, another reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or carry stethoscopes. Sometimes they push mop buckets and carry wisdom that medical degrees can't teach. Mr. Washington, Thomas said afterward, tears in his eyes, I almost didn't say anything. I'm just a janitor. Marcus put his hand on the young man's shoulder. There's no such thing as just anything, Thomas. You're a human being who noticed another human being in distress and did something about it. That makes you a hero in my book. The executive, recovering in his hospital bed, would later tell everyone that a janitor had saved his life. The story would spread, adding to the legend, reinforcing the message that had become Meridian's unofficial motto, everyone sees something. Everyone matters. The years passed, and the program grew. Marcus trained hundreds of workers to trust their instincts, to speak up, to know their worth. Daniel restructured the entire company hierarchy to ensure that insights from every level reached decision-makers quickly. The company's success became a Harvard case study, a TED Talk, a movement that challenged everything corporate America thought it knew about value and wisdom and worth. But the real success, Marcus knew, was in the individual lives saved, the voices found, the invisible made visible. Every letter from a worker who had spoken up, every story of a life saved by someone who once thought they didn't matter, these were the true measures of success. On his 70th birthday, Marcus announced his retirement. The celebration was held not in the executive conference room but in a cafeteria, with every shift attending, from the dawn cleaning crew to the midnight security team. Daniel, now gray-haired but healthy, gave a speech that brought the room to tears. 8 years ago, Marcus Washington knocked on my door and saved my life. But more than that, he changed how I see the world. He taught me that wisdom doesn't wear a suit, that observation doesn't require a degree, and that the most important insights often come from the people we're trained not to see. He turned to Marcus. You've saved more lives than you know, not just through direct intervention but by teaching others they have the power to do the same. You've built a legacy that will outlive us all, the belief that every person, in every role, has the power to make a difference. Marcus stood to speak, looking out at the sea of faces, each one representing a story, a perspective, a potential hero. When I started here 23 years ago, I was invisible. I pushed my cart through these halls believing that my only purpose was to clean up after important people doing important work. I never imagined that one day I would stand here, having helped save lives, having changed how this company and others see their workers. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. But here's what I want you to remember, I didn't become valuable the day I saved Mr. Sterling's life. I was always valuable. We all are. Every single one of us brings something unique, something necessary, something that could make the difference between life and death, success and failure, hope and despair. The only thing that changed was that someone finally listened. The room erupted in applause that lasted for minutes. When it finally died down, Marcus continued. I'm retiring, but the work continues. Each of you carries the responsibility now to see, to speak, to matter. Don't wait for permission. Don't assume someone else will notice what you've noticed. Don't ever believe that your perspective doesn't count because of your job title or your education or your background. He looked at Rosa, now a supervisor in the Human Insights department. At Thomas, who had saved 3 more lives since that first intervention. At all the faces of workers who had found their voices, their worth, their power. The title of this story, Marcus said, smiling, is, Black Janitor Saw the Symptoms Everyone Ignored, and Ended Up Saving the Life of the Millionaire CEO. But that's not the whole story. The whole story is that a janitor and a CEO saved each other, and in doing so, created something that saves lives every single day. The whole story is that every one of you has the power to be the hero of someone else's story. You just have to be willing to see, to speak, and to believe that you matter. As Marcus left the building for the last time as an employee, Daniel walked with him. They stood in the parking lot, looking back at the gleaming tower where their lives had intersected in such an unexpected way. What will you do now? Daniel asked. Marcus smiled. There are a lot of buildings out there, Daniel. A lot of invisible people pushing carts through hallways, seeing things others miss. Maybe I'll visit them. Share the story. Let them know they matter. Daniel pulled out an envelope. The board approved funding for a nationwide program. Every city, every major corporation. The Marcus Washington Initiative for Workplace Insight and Intervention. You don't have to run it, but we'd like you to be its founding ambassador. Marcus took the envelope, not for the money but for what it represented, the opportunity to make the invisible visible on a scale he had never imagined. Sarah would be proud, he said quietly. Daniel nodded. She would be proud of what you've built from your loss. How you've turned grief into purpose, invisibility into insight, silence into salvation. They shook hands, then embraced, two men whose unlikely friendship had changed not just their lives but the lives of thousands. As Marcus drove away, he thought about all the buildings in all the cities, full of workers who didn't yet know their worth, their power, their potential to save lives. He had work to do still, stories to tell, voices to awaken. The legend of the janitor who saved the CEO would continue to spread, inspiring workers and executives alike to see each other, really see each other, across the artificial barriers of hierarchy and status. But for Marcus, it would always be simply about that moment when he chose to knock on a door, to speak up, to believe that what he had noticed mattered. That single decision had changed everything, proving that heroes don't always come from where we expect, that wisdom doesn't always wear a suit, and that sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you never thought to see. The story ends where it began, with a knock on a door, a voice speaking up, a life saved because someone was paying attention. But now, instead of one Marcus Washington, there were thousands, in every building, in every city, no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer doubting their worth. Each one carrying the knowledge that their perspective mattered, their observations could save lives, and their voice deserved to be heard. Years later, when business historians would write about the transformation of American corporate culture in the early 21st century, they would point to this moment, this story, this unlikely friendship between a janitor and a CEO as the catalyst for change. But Marcus knew better. The change hadn't started with him saving Daniel's life. It had started with Sarah, with her illness that taught him to see symptoms others missed, with her death that made him promise never to stay silent when he noticed suffering. Every life saved since then was part of her legacy too, a continuation of the love that had taught him to pay attention, to care deeply, and to speak up even when it seemed like no one was listening. The Marcus Washington Initiative grew beyond anything anyone had imagined. Within 3 years, it was active in every major city in America. Training programs were developed for service workers, teaching them not just to observe but to trust their observations, to find their voice, and to understand the unique value of their perspective. Medical schools began incorporating the program's principles, teaching future doctors that sometimes the most important diagnostic information comes from the people who see patients every day in non-medical contexts. Business schools created entire courses around the concept of invisible intelligence, the wisdom that exists at every level of an organization but often goes untapped because no one thinks to ask, no one thinks to listen. Marcus traveled extensively in those early years, despite his age, speaking at conferences, visiting hospitals, meeting with CEOs and janitors alike. His message was always the same, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had lived the truth he was sharing. At a conference in Chicago, he told a room full of executives about the night he knocked on Daniel's door, but then he asked them a question that made them all uncomfortable. How many of you know the name of the person who cleans your office? The silence was telling. Out of 200 executives, fewer than 10 hands went up. Those people whose names you don't know, Marcus continued, they see you every day. They notice when you're stressed, when you're sick, when you're struggling. They could be your early warning system, your insight into problems you don't even know exist. But you'll never know because you don't see them, and they don't. Believe their observations about you matter. He challenged them to spend 1 hour with their service staff, just listening, just learning. The results were extraordinary. A CEO in Detroit discovered his company was about to lose its biggest client because the night janitor had overheard conversations that indicated dissatisfaction. A hospital administrator in Phoenix learned about dangerous shortcuts in sterilization procedures from a cleaning woman who had noticed patterns others missed. A tech startup in Austin avoided a major security breach because a security guard had noticed unusual activity that seemed insignificant to everyone else. Each story added to the growing evidence that wisdom existed at every level, that observation didn't require education, and that sometimes the most important insights came from the most unexpected sources. But the program wasn't without its challenges. Some executives resisted, unable to let go of traditional hierarchies. Some workers were afraid to speak up, generations of being told to stay in their place hard to overcome. There were failures too, times when observations were wrong, when speaking up caused problems rather than solving them. But Marcus had expected this. Change, real change, was never smooth or easy. It required patience, persistence, and the willingness to fail forward. He established support networks for workers who faced retaliation for speaking up, legal resources for those who uncovered wrongdoing, and counseling for those who carried the weight of knowing they could have saved someone if only they had spoken sooner. One particularly difficult case involved a janitor in Boston named Patricia who had noticed signs of child abuse in one of the executives' families. She had seen the bruises on the child who sometimes came to the office, heard the sharp words, felt the fear. But she was terrified to speak up, afraid of losing her job, afraid of being wrong, afraid of making things worse. She reached out to Marcus through the initiative's hotline, her voice shaking as she described what she had seen. Marcus flew to Boston that night. He sat with Patricia for hours, listening, validating her observations, helping her understand that her fear was normal but her silence could be deadly. Together, they developed a plan. Patricia would document what she saw, and the initiative would ensure the proper authorities were notified while protecting her identity and her job. The investigation that followed revealed a situation even worse than Patricia had observed. The child was removed from immediate danger, the family got the help they needed, and Patricia was recognized not as a troublemaker but as a hero who had potentially saved a young life. The executive, once he got through his initial anger and shame, actually thanked Patricia, acknowledging that her courage in speaking up had forced him to confront problems he had been denying for years. "You saw what I was hiding from myself," he told her. "You saved my family by refusing to look away." Patricia's story became a cornerstone of the initiative's training, an example of how observation could extend beyond physical symptoms to social ones, how the responsibility to speak up extended beyond the workplace to anywhere one human could help another. Daniel, meanwhile, had transformed Meridian Technologies into something unprecedented in corporate America. The company's structure was revolutionary, with service workers sitting on advisory committees, their insights given equal weight to those of executives. The traditional suggestion box was replaced with a rapid response system where any employee could escalate an observation directly to leadership within hours. The company's profits soared, but more importantly, employee satisfaction reached unprecedented levels. People wanted to work for a company where they mattered, where their voice counted, where their observations could make a difference. The waiting list for janitor positions at Meridian was longer than the list for management roles, something that made business journalists scratch their heads but made perfect sense to Marcus. On a warm spring evening, 5 years into his retirement, Marcus received a call that brought him full circle. Daniel was in the hospital, not for his tumor, which remained gone, but for a heart problem that had been caught early, once again by an observant worker. This time it was a cafeteria worker named Eduardo who had noticed Daniel's unusual eating patterns, his avoidance of foods he usually loved, his subtle winces when walking upstairs. Eduardo had learned from Marcus's story, had trusted his observations, and had spoken up despite his nervousness about approaching the CEO. Daniel's blockage was caught before it could cause a heart attack. Another life saved by someone paying attention from a different angle. Marcus visited Daniel in the hospital, finding him in good spirits despite the circumstances. Saved by the help again, Daniel said with a wry smile. "I'm starting to think I should just have all my medical care provided by service workers. They seem to catch things before they become critical. Marcus sat beside his bed, remembering another hospital room years ago where he had waited to hear if Daniel would survive his brain surgery. "It's not that they're better at medicine," Marcus said. "It's that they see you when you don't know you're being watched. They see you when your guard is down, when you're just human, not performing for anyone. That's when the truth shows itself." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "You know what the board asked me last week? They wanted to know when this experiment would be complete, when we could go back to normal operations. I told them this is normal now. This is how business should always have been done. Every person, every perspective, every observation valued." He paused, then added, "They also asked when you're really going to retire. Apparently, being a founding ambassador isn't retirement in their books." Marcus laughed. "I'll retire when people stop needing to hear that they matter. So probably never." As Daniel recovered, the story of Eduardo's observation spread, adding another chapter to the ever-growing legend. But Eduardo himself said something that Marcus found even more powerful than the life-saving observation. When asked how he felt about saving the CEO's life, Eduardo had said, "I didn't save him because he's the CEO. I saved him because he's a person, and I could see he was struggling. Mr. Washington taught us that every life matters equally, that a janitor's life is worth as much as a CEO's, and that means a CEO's life is worth as much as anyone else's too. We're all just humans looking out for each other." This philosophy, simple as it was, became the unofficial motto of the movement. Not the corporate speak about leveraging human capital or optimizing observational resources, but simply, we're all just humans looking out for each other. It appeared on bumper stickers, coffee mugs, and eventually, carved into the lobby of Meridian Technologies' new headquarters. The building itself was designed to embody the principles Marcus had taught. There were no separate entrances for executives and service staff. The cafeteria was on the top floor with the best views, equally accessible to all. Meeting rooms were transparent, with glass walls that allowed anyone to see in, removing the mystery and separation that had once defined corporate culture. Marcus's office, which he still occasionally used despite his retirement, was positioned where the janitor's closet used to be, a deliberate reminder of where the journey had begun. But the most revolutionary feature was the observation board, a digital display in the main lobby where any employee could post observations, concerns, or insights in real time, visible to everyone including visitors. It created a culture of transparency and shared responsibility that was initially uncomfortable for many but ultimately transformative. The board showed everything from coffee machine on third floor making unusual noise, to noticed 3 employees showing signs of burnout in accounting department, to competitors' product launch might affect our Q3 projections based on customer conversations overheard in lobby. Each observation was taken seriously, investigated, and responded to publicly. The result was a kind of collective intelligence that no single executive or department could have achieved alone. The company's ability to anticipate problems, identify opportunities, and respond to challenges became legendary in the business world. Competitors tried to copy the model but often failed because they copied the structure without embracing the fundamental belief that powered it, that every person's perspective had value. Marcus consulted with many of these companies, trying to help them understand that it wasn't about the system but about the sincere belief that the person cleaning the bathroom might notice something the CEO missed, and that both observations were equally worthy of consideration. One company in particular struggled with the concept. Their CEO, a woman named Victoria Chen, had implemented all the right programs but couldn't understand why they weren't working. Marcus spent a day shadowing their janitors and quickly identified the problem. "Your people don't believe you really want to hear from them," he told Victoria. "They're going through the motions because they think it's another corporate initiative that will fade away. You need to prove you're serious." Victoria was frustrated. "How do I prove it? I've said it in every meeting. Sent emails, created the programs." Marcus smiled gently. "When was the last time you had lunch in the cafeteria with the service staff? When did you last ask a janitor for their opinion on something that matters to you personally, not just professionally?" Your people need to see you value them as humans, not just as potential sources of information. Victoria took the advice to heart. She started spending one lunch a week with different service staff, not talking about work but about life, families, dreams. She learned their names, their stories, their perspectives on everything from politics to parenting. Slowly, the walls came down. People started believing she actually cared, and once they believed that, they started sharing what they observed. Within 6 months, her company uncovered a major embezzlement scheme, identified 3 employees with serious health issues who got early treatment, and discovered a product defect before it reached the market, all through observations from service staff who finally felt safe and valued enough to speak up. The ripple effects of Marcus's work spread far beyond corporate America. Schools began teaching children that everyone's observations mattered, that the quiet kid in the back might notice something the teacher missed. Hospitals implemented programs where janitors, food service workers, and security guards were trained to observe and report signs of patient distress or medical errors. Even the military began incorporating the principles, recognizing that the private on guard duty might observe something the general would never see. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the individuals whose lives were saved, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually, by finally being seen. Marcus kept a file of letters from workers who had found their voice through the initiative. There was the security guard in Miami who had prevented a suicide by noticing subtle changes in a late-night worker's behavior. The cafeteria worker in Seattle who had identified a gas leak everyone else had missed. The parking attendant in New York who had recognized signs of human trafficking and helped rescue 3 victims. Each letter was a testament to the power of observation, the importance of speaking up, and the value of every human perspective. But there were also letters from executives, from people in power who had learned to see differently. A CEO in Dallas wrote about how listening to his janitor's observations about employee morale had helped him prevent a mass exodus of talent. A hospital administrator in Portland described how a cleaning woman's insight about patient flow had revolutionized their emergency room efficiency. A school principal in Memphis explained how the custodian's observations about student behavior had helped identify and address a serious bullying problem. These leaders had learned that wisdom didn't always come from above, that sometimes the most valuable insights came from those closest to the ground, those who saw reality without the filters of hierarchy and politics. 10 years after that first night when Marcus knocked on Daniel's door, a documentary was made about the movement they had started. The filmmakers interviewed hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the initiative. They filmed Marcus, now in his late 70s but still sharp, still passionate, walking through the halls of Meridian Technologies, pointing out the spots where crucial observations had been made. "Right here," he said, standing in the executive hallway, "this is where I almost walked past Mr. Sterling's office that night. I had cleaned it 1,000 times, always when it was empty. But something made me knock that night. Call it instinct, call it God, call it whatever you want. But I knocked, and everything changed." The documentary included footage of Daniel, healthy and vital, still running the company but in a radically different way. "Marcus didn't just save my life," he said to the camera. "He saved my soul. He taught me that the view from the top is limited, that real wisdom comes from multiple perspectives, and that the people we ignore might be the ones who could save us." They showed the 2 men together, walking through the building, an unlikely pair who had become not just friends but brothers in a mission to transform how society values different perspectives. The film ended with them standing on the roof of the building, looking out over the city, all those buildings full of invisible people with valuable observations. "What do you see?" the filmmaker asked them. Daniel spoke first. "I see thousands of potential lifesavers, innovators, problem solvers who don't yet know their worth." Marcus nodded, then added, "I see a world where every person matters, where every observation counts, where no one is invisible anymore. It's not there yet, but it's coming. One knock on a door at a time." The documentary won numerous awards and was shown in schools and corporations around the world. But for Marcus, the real victory wasn't in the recognition but in the knowledge that somewhere, in some building, someone who had been invisible was finding their voice, was speaking up, was saving a life or a company or a dream because they had learned that their perspective mattered. As Marcus entered his 80s, he finally began to slow down. His travels became less frequent, his speeches shorter. But he never stopped observing, never stopped teaching, never stopped believing in the power of every human perspective. He established a foundation with his accumulated wealth, dedicated to training service workers worldwide in observation and communication skills. He endowed scholarships for the children of janitors, security guards, and food service workers, ensuring that the next generation would have opportunities their parents never had. But he always emphasized that education wasn't required for wisdom, that some of the smartest people he knew had never finished high school but could read a room, a person, a situation better than any PhD. On his 80th birthday, Meridian Technologies unveiled a statue in the lobby. Not of Daniel Sterling, the CEO who had built the company into a powerhouse, but of Marcus Washington, pushing a cleaning cart with one hand while reaching out with the other, as if to knock on a door. The inscription read, "Marcus Washington, who saw what others missed, who spoke when others were silent, who proved that every person matters." Marcus was embarrassed by the statue, said it made him look taller than he was. But he understood what it represented. It wasn't really about him. It was about every person who had ever been overlooked, undervalued, or ignored. It was a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or carry degrees. Sometimes they carry mops and wisdom in equal measure. The ceremony was attended by hundreds, from janitors to senators, all united by the understanding that Marcus's story had changed how they saw the world. Speeches were given, tears were shed, and stories were shared of lives saved and transformed. But the moment that moved Marcus most was when a young janitor named David approached him. David worked the night shift, just as Marcus once had. He was nervous, stuttering slightly as he spoke. "Mr. Washington, I just wanted to say thank you. Not for the programs or the training, but for showing me that I matter. My whole life, I felt invisible. Now I know I see things others don't, and that's not a curse, it's a gift." Marcus embraced the young man, feeling the circle complete. "You always mattered, David. I just helped you see it. Now go help others see it too." As the celebration continued around him, Marcus found himself standing with Daniel in the exact spot where they had first truly seen each other years ago. The office had been preserved as a kind of museum, a reminder of where the transformation began. "Did you ever imagine it would become this?" Daniel asked, gesturing at the crowd, the statue, the global movement they had sparked. Marcus shook his head. "I just wanted to save your life. I never imagined we'd end up saving so many others." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You know what I've learned? Every life saved creates ripples. You saved me, I changed the company inspired others, and now thousands of people are alive because you knocked on my door. That's the real miracle." They stood together in comfortable silence, two old men who had changed the world not through force or wealth but through the simple act of seeing and being seen. Outside, the city hummed with life, millions of people going about their daily business, most unaware of the revolution in human dignity that had started in this very building. But awareness was spreading. In hospitals and schools, offices and factories, restaurants and retail stores, people were learning to see each other differently. The invisible were becoming visible, the silent were finding their voice, and lives were being saved every day by people who once thought they didn't matter. As the sun set on that celebration, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Marcus thought about Sarah one more time. He imagined telling her about all of this, about how her death had led to so many lives saved, how the pain of losing her had become purpose, how the symptoms he had failed to see in her had taught him to see symptoms in others. He knew she would be proud, but more than that, she would be amazed at how one moment of courage, one knock on a door, could change everything. "Thank you," he whispered to her memory. "Thank you for teaching me to see." The story could end here, with success and recognition, with lives saved and dignity restored. But that wouldn't be the whole truth. Because the work continued, the observations kept coming, and the lives kept being saved. Every day, somewhere in the world, someone who had heard Marcus's story found the courage to speak up about something they had noticed. Every day, someone in power learned to listen to someone they had previously ignored. Every day, the invisible became a little more visible, and the world became a little more whole. The title of this story is, Black Janitor Saw the Symptoms Everyone Ignored, and Ended Up Saving the Life of the Millionaire CEO. But the real story, the bigger story, is about how that one act of observation and courage created a movement that proved everyone has the power to save lives, that wisdom exists at every level of society, and that the people we overlook might be the ones who see most clearly. Marcus Washington passed away peacefully on a spring morning, 5 years after his 80th birthday celebration. He died as he had lived in his later years, surrounded by people whose lives he had touched, whose voices he had helped find, whose worth he had helped reveal. His funeral was unlike any other. The cathedral was packed not with dignitaries and celebrities, though many were there, but with janitors, security guards, cafeteria workers, and cleaning staff from around the world. They came to honor the man who had shown them they mattered, who had proved that their observations could save lives, who had refused to let them remain invisible. Daniel Sterling gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke. Marcus Washington saved my life twice. Once when he saw my symptoms and forced me to get help. And again when he taught me to see the world through different eyes. He showed me that leadership isn't about being at the top but about recognizing the value in every level. He proved that wisdom doesn't require degrees, that observation doesn't require authority, and that the courage to speak up can come from anyone, anywhere, at any time. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, many streaked with tears. Marcus used to say that he was just a janitor who knocked on a door. But he was so much more. He was a prophet of human dignity, a champion of the overlooked, a hero who showed us that heroes are everywhere if we just learn to see them. The funeral procession was unlike anything the city had ever seen. Thousands of service workers lined the streets, many holding signs that simply said, "I see you," or "Every observation matters," or "Thank you, Marcus." As the hearse passed, they didn't throw flowers. Instead, they held up their cleaning tools, their mops and brooms and dustpans, raised high like salutes to a fallen general. It was a powerful image that made headlines around the world, the invisible made visible, honoring the man who had shown them their worth. Marcus was buried beside Sarah, the two of them together again. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates, but someone had added an inscription that perfectly captured Marcus's legacy: he taught the world to see. In the days following his death, stories poured in from around the globe. A janitor in Tokyo who had saved an entire office from carbon monoxide poisoning. A security guard in London who had prevented a terrorist attack. A cafeteria worker in Cairo who had identified a deadly food contamination before it could spread. Each one credited Marcus's story, his teaching, his example as the reason they had trusted their observations and spoken up. The Marcus Washington Initiative announced that it would continue and expand, with David, the young janitor Marcus had embraced at his 80th birthday, appointed as its new director. David's first act was to establish the Sarah and Marcus Washington Memorial Fund, dedicated to healthcare for service workers and their families, ensuring that no one would suffer what Sarah had suffered due to lack of access or attention. A year after Marcus's death, something remarkable happened. The United Nations declared an International Day of Observation, recognizing the importance of valuing every human perspective in creating a safer, more just world. On that day, celebrated on the anniversary of the night Marcus knocked on Daniel's door, organizations worldwide were encouraged to listen to their service staff, to seek input from those often overlooked, to recognize that wisdom and observation exist at every level of society. The first celebration of this day saw extraordinary results. In New Delhi, a street sweeper's observation prevented a building collapse. In São Paulo, a hospital janitor's insight led to the discovery of a new treatment protocol. In Nairobi, a school custodian's observation helped identify and stop a child trafficking ring. Each story added to the growing legacy of a man who had simply knocked on a door when he saw someone in distress. Daniel Sterling, now in his 70s, continued to run Meridian Technologies with the principles Marcus had taught him. The company had become the most successful and most admired corporation in the world, not despite its radical approach to valuing every employee but because of it. Business schools sent students to study the Meridian model, trying to understand how a company that treated its janitors as valuable as its executives could outperform traditional hierarchical organizations. The answer was simple but profound: when every person feels valued, when every observation is welcomed, when every voice is heard, the collective intelligence and commitment of the organization reaches levels that traditional structures can never achieve. 5 years after Marcus's death, Daniel published his autobiography. He had finally found the perfect title: The Knock That Changed Everything, How a Janitor Saved My Life and Taught Me to See. The book became an international bestseller, with all proceeds going to the Marcus Washington Initiative. In it, Daniel wrote honestly about his life before Marcus, the blindness that came with privilege and power, the assumptions he had made about worth and value. He wrote about the night Marcus knocked on his door, the fear of the diagnosis, the surgery, and the slow realization that Marcus had given him more than just his health back. He had given him new eyes to see the world. The book's final chapter was titled The Ongoing Knock, and in it, Daniel wrote, "Marcus Washington knocked on my door one night and saved my life. But the truth is, he never stopped knocking. Every day, in every interaction, he knocked on the doors of our assumptions, our prejudices, our blindness to the value of every human being. He knocked until we opened, until we saw, until we understood that the janitor might save the CEO, that the cleaner might see what the doctor missed, that the invisible might be the most insightful of all." His knock echoes still, in every organization that values all voices, in every life saved by someone who was paying attention, in every person who finds the courage to speak up because they know they matter. Marcus is gone, but his knock continues, and it will continue as long as there are doors that need opening, symptoms that need seeing, and lives that need saving. The book ended with a call to action: listen for the knock. It might come from the person you least expect, at the moment you least expect it. It might save your life. More importantly, it might save your soul by teaching you to see the value in every human being. The impact of Marcus's story continued to grow, reaching into areas no one had anticipated. Police departments began training officers to value observations from homeless individuals and street vendors. Airlines trained pilots to listen to concerns from baggage handlers and gate agents. Even governments began implementing programs to gather insights from citizens often overlooked in policymaking. But perhaps the most profound impact was on individuals who had spent their lives feeling invisible. The letters to the Marcus Washington Initiative numbered in the millions now, each one a story of someone who had found their voice, their worth, their power to make a difference. There was the night watchman who had prevented a school shooting by noticing and reporting unusual behavior. The hotel maid who had saved a guest from a heart attack. The parking lot attendant who had identified a kidnapped child. Each story was different, but the theme was the same: someone who had once felt invisible had realized they could see things others couldn't, and their observations mattered. 10 years after Marcus's death, a monument was unveiled in Washington, D.C. It wasn't a statue of Marcus himself, he would have hated that, but rather a door, standing alone, slightly ajar, with a hand raised to knock. The inscription read, "In memory of Marcus Washington and all those who have the courage to knock, to speak, to see, and to save." The monument became a pilgrimage site for service workers from around the world, who would come to touch the door, to remember that they had the power to open doors, to change lives, to matter in ways they might never have imagined. At the dedication ceremony, David, now a globally recognized advocate for worker dignity, spoke about Marcus's legacy. "He didn't just teach us to observe," David said. "He taught us that we were worthy of being observed, that our lives, our perspectives, our insights were valuable. He showed us that the view from the ground up could see things the view from the top down never could. He proved that every person, regardless of their job, their education, their status, had the potential to save a life, to change a company, to transform the world." The ceremony was attended by thousands, including many whose lives had been saved by observant workers. They shared their stories, creating a chorus of gratitude that echoed across the National Mall. But the most moving moment came when a group of children from a school in inner-city Baltimore, all children of service workers, sang a song they had written about Marcus. The chorus was simple but powerful: every eye can see, every voice can speak, every hand can save, every person matters. As their young voices filled the air, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. These children were growing up in a world where their parents' work was valued, where their observations mattered, where they knew from the earliest age that they had the power to make a difference. This was Marcus's true legacy, not just the lives saved but the dignity restored, the worth recognized, the potential unleashed. 20 years after that night when Marcus knocked on Daniel's door, the world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The term invisible worker had become obsolete, replaced with essential observer. Companies competed to attract the most observant service staff, understanding that they were hiring not just cleaners or guards but vital members of their human intelligence network. Medical schools taught courses on peripheral observation, training doctors to value input from non-medical staff. Business schools studied the Washington Principle, the idea that the most valuable insights often come from the most unexpected sources. But more than institutional change, there had been a fundamental shift in how society understood human value. The old hierarchies still existed, but they were more permeable, more flexible, more open to wisdom from every level. The security guard's observation was given the same weight as the executive's analysis. The janitor's insight was valued alongside the consultant's report. The cafeteria worker's concern was treated with the same urgency as the board member's warning. This wasn't just political correctness or corporate policy. It was a practical recognition that in a complex world, no single perspective could see everything, and the most important observations might come from the most unexpected sources. Companies that embraced this philosophy thrived. Those that didn't struggle to compete in a world where collective intelligence had replaced individual genius as the key to success. Daniel Sterling, now in his 80s and finally ready to retire, gave his last speech as CEO of Meridian Technologies. He stood in the same lobby where Marcus's statue stood, addressing employees of every level, from interns to executives, from janitors to engineers. 20 years ago, he began, a man knocked on my door and saved my life. But more than that, he knocked on the door of our collective consciousness and woke us up to a simple truth: every person has the power to save a life, every observation has potential value, and every voice deserves to be heard. Marcus Washington didn't just save me. He saved us all from a world where people could be invisible, where wisdom could be ignored because of its source, where lives could be lost because we didn't think to listen to the people who saw what we couldn't see. He paused, looking at the statue of Marcus, then continued. As I step down, I leave you with the same challenge Marcus left me: keep knocking. Keep observing. Keep speaking up. Keep listening. Keep believing that every person matters. The title of our story might be Black Janitor. Saw the symptoms everyone ignored, and ended up saving the life of the millionaire CEO, but the real story is ongoing. It's written every day by each of you who chooses to see, to speak, to matter. Marcus's knock still echoes in these halls, in your observations, in your courage to speak truth regardless of your position. Don't let it fade. Don't let it be forgotten. Keep knocking until every door is open, every voice is heard, every life that can be saved is saved. As Daniel finished speaking, the room erupted in applause, but it was different from typical corporate applause. It came from every level, unified, genuine, a recognition that they were all part of something larger than a company. They were part of a movement that had changed how humanity saw itself, how value was determined, how wisdom was recognized. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but within its buildings, something fundamental had shifted. The invisible had become visible, the silent had found their voices, and lives were being saved every day by people who once thought they didn't matter. The story of Marcus Washington had become legend, taught in schools, shared in training programs, referenced in speeches and sermons around the world. But at its heart, it remained a simple story. A janitor saw symptoms everyone else ignored and saved a CEO's life. That CEO, transformed by the experience, helped the janitor save thousands more. Together, they proved that heroes don't always wear capes or carry stethoscopes. Sometimes they push mop buckets through empty hallways, watching, observing, waiting for the moment when their knock could change everything. And in a world that had learned to listen for that knock, to value that observation, to see every person as potentially vital, the echoes of Marcus Washington's courage continue to save lives, restore dignity, and remind humanity that everyone, absolutely everyone, matters. The title of this story is, Black Janitor Saw the Symptoms Everyone Ignored, and Ended Up Saving the Life of the Millionaire CEO. But the story itself is about so much more. It's about the power of observation, the courage to speak up, the value of every human perspective, and the transformation that occurs when we learn to see each other, really see each other, across all the artificial barriers we've created. It's about Marcus Washington, who knocked on a door and changed the world. It's about Daniel Sterling, who listened and learned and led differently. It's about every invisible person who found their voice, every life saved by an unexpected observation, every moment when someone chose to see and speak and matter. Most of all, it's about the ongoing knock, the one that continues to echo in every building, every organization, every heart that has learned the lesson Marcus taught, that every person has the power to save a life, that every observation matters, and that the most important vision often comes from the most unexpected eyes. The knock continues. The door remains open. And the world is better because one night, a janitor chose to see, to care, and to speak. That's the real story, and it never truly ends.